The hanging of the puppet. I found the page by accident, wedged between brittle newspaper clippings in an old Florentine archive. The handwriting was Collodi's, unmistakable looping, nervous, impatient. The ink had bled into the paper like veins. The passage wasn't in any printed edition. It described a puppet struggling at the end of a rope and stopped mid-sentence. No conclusion. Just a blot where the last word should have been. I told myself it was an abandoned draft, but the archivist wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked. He only said, "Some endings are better left unfinished." Back in my apartment, I translated the text line by line. The language felt wrong, half Italian, half something older. The puppet's thoughts were written as if the wood itself remembered pain. That night, I heard tapping from my bookshelf. 3 slow knocks. I thought it was the radiator until the sound matched the rhythm of Collodi's pen strokes. The next morning, my notebook smelled faintly of varnish. I thought I imagined it. I hoped I did. I moved the papers to my desk, away from the bookshelf. The ink blot had darkened. My fingertip came away sticky, as if the page was still breathing. There was a note written in the margin I hadn't noticed yesterday. "When the puppet stops moving, listen for the breath behind you." I told myself it was a prank or my imagination, but the sentence pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. I couldn't stop. That night, I dreamed of strings crossing the ceiling like spider silk. One brushed my face, cold and wet, as though dipped in rainwater. When I woke, the strings were gone, but my cheeks smelled faintly of pine. In the morning light, a marionette on my shelf had shifted position, its head tilted toward the window, mouth open just enough to show painted teeth. I tried photographing it. The photo revealed only empty shells, dust motes suspended in sunlight. The puppet looked static in the image, though I had seen it move. Every evening, I returned to the page. Every evening, the air seemed heavier, charged, as though the ink itself was aware of my attention. I began hearing soft creaking, like wooden joints bending. It came from the corner of the room, near the shadow where the puppet had stood. I laid out the pages on my desk, trying to track patterns. Margins, blotches, small marks. Everything suggested a code, a message, or a warning. The tapping returned at midnight, faint, deliberate. 3 times again, like a heartbeat counting down. I left a pencil by the puppet. By morning, it was moved to the edge of the shelf, sharpened tip pointing toward the window. One researched Collodi obsessively. Original drafts described harsh punishments, grotesque morality lessons, and hanging. I realized the story was meant to terrify, not entertain. I placed the marionette on the floor and stepped back. Its shadow stretched unnaturally, as if the light bent around it with intent. I tried ignoring it. Impossible. Even walking past my bookshelf felt like trespassing into its domain. I began leaving small notes near the page. "Why are you here? What do you want?" By morning, the paper was slightly folded, edges creased. The air smelled faintly of sawdust, varnish, and something metallic I couldn't name. It reminded me of a workshop and a funeral simultaneously. I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. The puppet had shifted, not fully upright, but just enough to suggest awareness. Sleep became fractured. Dreams of strings, ropes, and wooden limbs, twisting in impossible angles, haunted me nightly. I started recording the room overnight. Video showed only empty space, shadows drifting. But when I replayed it, the puppet appeared, head cocked, always in a different corner. I tried confronting it directly. "I'm aware of you. Stop this." Silence. Only the faint scent of pine and varnish. I began leaving small mirrors along the shelf. Reflections revealed dust, sunlight, and the faintest outline of movement I couldn't explain. The narrative in the page became more urgent, strange marks appearing I hadn't noticed before. It was as if Collodi himself were guiding my attention. I realized the story was unfinished because it was never meant to end. The puppet's existence, in ink and wood, was a psychological trap, a lesson in observation and fear. Even when away from the apartment, I imagined the puppet watching, standing silently on the shelf, waiting for me to return. I tried sharing the story with a friend. They saw only a carved wooden boy, inert. Only I perceived the pulse, the movement, the awareness. The more I studied, the more I felt tethered. My attention fed something in the shadows, something patient, deliberate, waiting. I stopped touching the page. I stopped opening the manuscript at night. Awareness alone became my only control. Even now, I glance at the puppet and the shelf. I measure its shadow. I count the distance from its feet to the wall. I know it watches, patient, precise, inevitable. The page remains on my desk, blotches darkened, margins whispering. I leave it untouched, only opening when necessary, knowing every glance fuels a silent observer. The marionette waits. The strings remain taut unseen, and I remain tethered, cautious and quietly terrified. The girl in the blue room. I first heard about the blue room while researching Florence's forgotten orphanages. The building was abandoned, but locals whispered of a small girl who never left. The records were sparse. Most files were lost to fire or decay. Only one photograph remained, a tiny girl in a pale blue dress, staring directly at the camera, eyes too knowing. The archivist warned me not to linger too long. Some rooms remember, he said. I laughed, but the unease remained. I visited the building at dusk, careful to step over broken floorboards. The main hall smelled faintly of old wood and varnish, but a subtle sweetness lingered, almost floral. At the far end, a door painted a dull cerulean caught my attention. Dust had formed thick ridges along the threshold. I hesitated, hand hovering over the knob. Inside, the room was smaller than expected. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating peeling wallpaper and a single chair facing the wall. The air felt heavy, charged. It pressed against my chest as if inhaled by something invisible. I noticed scratches along the floor, faint, precise, forming patterns I couldn't recognize. They weren't recent, but they didn't belong to time either. Then I heard a faint whisper, curling along the walls. A voice, small and deliberate. "Why are you here?" I froze. My eyes darted across the room, searching for the source. Only shadows moved, cast oddly in the corner, elongated and bending as if alive. I set up my camera, thinking I'd capture nothing. The device recorded only empty floorboards, the chair, and sunlight falling across the peeling paint. Yet my mind insisted I had seen her. A small shape crouched in the corner, wearing pale blue, almost translucent, watching. I documented every detail. The scratches, the angles of light, the faint smell of perfume mixed with decay. Everything suggested presence without form. I returned at night with a flashlight. The room had changed. The chair now faced the doorway. The shadows seemed thicker, darker, almost waiting. I whispered her name. The air shifted, a faint exhale brushing against my neck. I spun. Nothing, but a faint blue shimmer lingered in the corner. The building groaned. Floorboards creaked in patterns, soft taps, deliberate, echoing the rhythm of Collodi's lost drafts. I left offerings, small notes, coins, tiny scraps of paper. By morning, the paper had shifted slightly, edges creased. Nothing else moved. The scent grew stronger, perfumed and metallic, like the hospital wards of old orphanages, like antiseptic mixed with decay. I began researching the girl. Archival notes suggested she had been left behind, perhaps neglected, perhaps punished. Some pages hinted at supernatural claims from nurses who worked late shifts. I started seeing faint reflections in glass and mirrors. A small figure, blue dress, eyes too knowing. always watching, never approaching. My dreams became restless. Pale blue shapes flickered in dark rooms. Whispers curled around my ears, indecipherable but insistent. I returned one evening, drawn by compulsion rather than curiosity. The room felt alive. Shadows twisted unnaturally, forming angles no architecture should allow. I spoke aloud, asking her why she remained. The air shifted, almost imperceptibly. The whispers returned, forming syllables I could not understand. I felt heavy in my chest. I noticed tiny handprints on the dust-covered windowsill. Not mine, not fully human. Flat, delicate, impossible to miss. I tried leaving cameras again. They recorded empty space. Yet I could feel her presence, patient, deliberate, tethered to the room through observation alone. I began documenting patterns. When the whispering occurred, how shadows bent, the subtle shifts of light. Everything suggested awareness, intention. I left the building for days. The memory of the room haunted me. I could see her in reflective surfaces anywhere. Puddles, glass, even polished tabletops. I returned again. The chair had moved. The scratches on the floor had shifted direction. I was not imagining it. The whispers grew clearer. A single phrase repeated over and over, faint, curling around my mind. Do you see me? I left offerings again, tiny scraps of paper with questions. Some disappeared entirely. Others were subtly folded, altered, or charred at the edges. I realized the girl was not bound by time. She existed in the room, in memory, in observation. My attention fed her, tethered her presence. Even outside, I felt watched. I imagined her standing at windows, crouched in corners, waiting for me to return. The room had become a psychological trap, a stage for deliberate observation. Awareness was my only control. I stopped touching the chair. I stopped moving objects. I only observed quietly, measured every shadow, every whisper, every shift of blue in my mind's eye. The blue room waits. The girl waits. And I remain tethered, cautious, and aware of a presence older, patient, and impossible to ignore. The man who built a soul. I first learned of him in an obscure manuscript tucked into a library corner in Florence. A carpenter, obsessed with carving figures that could think, breathe, and remember. The notes were meticulous, detailing his attempts to infuse wood with essence, blending folklore with obscure alchemy and old mechanical designs. Most of the pages were charred, water-stained, and fragile. Only fragments remained, but the obsession was clear. He sought not just a puppet, but a soul. The workshop where he worked still stands, abandoned, rotting. Locals call it La Casa del Silencio, warning children never to enter. I ventured inside at dusk. Dust coated every surface. The air smelled faintly of pine and burnt resin, a scent both familiar and wrong. Old tools lay scattered. Mallets, chisels, saws, their handles worn from years of obsessive labor. Each seemed to hum faintly in the quiet. I noticed unfinished puppets along the walls. Limbs splayed unnaturally. Faces frozen mid-expression. Eyes half-carved. Mouths silent but seemingly whispering. A journal lay open on a table. Its pages detailed daily rituals, chants, sketches, diagrams of human anatomy overlaid on wooden limbs. The man had believed that concentration, repetition, and ritual could coax a soul from wood. Each attempt left subtle traces of something unexplainable. I set up my camera, expecting only dust motes. The footage revealed shadows shifting unnaturally. Some seemed to pulse, responding to my movements. I found a note in the margins of the journal. The soul listens. The soul waits. Treat it as more than wood. That night, I dreamed of tiny hands moving under the table, carving themselves from splinters of pine. Each limb formed with deliberate, impossible precision. I returned the next day. A puppet on the floor had shifted. Its head tilted, eyes carved wider than before, gaze focused directly on me. I tried photographing it. In the images, the puppet appeared flat, lifeless. Only I could perceive the subtle movements, the awareness behind the glassy gaze. The journal warned of consequences. Impatience, neglect, or disbelief could awaken anger in the carved soul. I noticed faint scratches along the floorboards, like tiny hands dragging themselves across the surface. No one else was there. I began documenting every shift, every shadow, every imperceptible change in the room. The workshop had become alive, or at least aware. The air grew thick with the smell of varnish and something metallic. It reminded me of old hospitals, of forgotten tools, and unsaid prayers. I imagined the man watching, patient and deliberate, guiding unseen hands through time, ensuring the essence he sought remained tethered. I left offerings, notes, small wooden pieces, coins. By morning, some were shifted, altered, or disappeared entirely. I tried ignoring the puppets. Impossible. Even outside, I sensed their gaze, the memory of patient observation following me home. The journal became more urgent, its language sharper, more insistent. It seemed aware of my attention, guiding me toward specific pages. I returned at night, flashlight in hand. Shadows bent unnaturally, stretching across walls, creating angles that defied geometry. I whispered questions aloud. "Are you aware? Can you move? Do you remember him?" The air responded with faint creaks, taps, and the smell of pine. The more I observed, the more I felt tethered. Awareness alone was my only protection. I began leaving mirrors in the room. Reflections revealed the workshop, tools and shadows, but subtle hints of movement persisted, always beyond clear sight. Sleep became fractured. Dreams of marionettes carving themselves, whispering in impossible languages, haunted me nightly. I started leaving the building entirely, yet the sense of observation never left. Even in sunlight, I felt their presence, patient and waiting. I realized the man's experiments were incomplete. The soul he sought never fully manifested, leaving only suggestion, observation, and psychological tethering. The puppets shifted when unobserved, but always returned to the edges of my perception. Awareness was both trap and tether. Even now, I feel their gaze. The workshop waits. The unfinished souls linger, patient, deliberate, tethered to those who dare notice. I have learned to respect the space, to observe without intrusion, to measure every shadow, every subtle movement, every echo of pine and resin. The man who built a soul is long gone, but his work persists alive in perception, tethered to awareness, and haunting anyone who dares look too closely. The puppet that learned to breathe. I found it in a dusty antique shop on the outskirts of Florence. A small marionette, carved from dark olive wood, polished smooth with age, and painted eyes that seemed almost alive. The shopkeeper avoided my gaze. He whispered only, "Take care. Some toys do not forgive curiosity." I brought the puppet home, placing it on my desk beside Collodi's original pages. Its painted eyes caught the lamplight, reflecting more than the room itself. That night, I awoke to a faint creak. The puppet had moved, just slightly. Head tilted, hands resting differently on its lap. I told myself I was imagining it. The next morning, it had shifted again, further than a simple bump could explain. I set up a camera, ready to catch a trick of gravity or floorboards. The footage showed only empty desk, sunlight spilling across dust, yet the puppet had changed positions again. I began documenting its movements. Minor adjustments at first, subtle, deliberate, as if testing boundaries. The air around it felt heavier. A faint scent of pine mixed with something metallic, like the residue of old tools and hidden effort. I opened Collodi's manuscript beside the puppet. Its gaze seemed to follow each line, anticipation curling in the shadowed corners of my vision. I started leaving notes, questions, nothing threatening, just observation. By morning, the edges were folded, the ink faintly smudged. At night, I heard faint whispering. Not a voice I recognized, but syllables curling like smoke, curling around my ears, impossible to trace. The more I observed, the more I felt tethered. The puppet existed in time, space, and awareness. It was patient, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I tried leaving it alone. Even in another room, I sensed its presence, a silent attention that waited for my return. The subtle movements escalated. A hand lifted slightly, fingers flexed. Its painted eyes seemed to glimmer, catching shadows and bending them. I placed mirrors around the desk. Reflections revealed only wood, dust, and lamplight. The shadows moved differently, stretched unnaturally in the corners. Sleep became fractured. Dreams of the puppet shifting, breathing, stretching, and observing me relentlessly haunted the nights. I researched the origin of the wood. Olive trees long dead, carved in secret by artisans rumored to whisper to their pieces, asking them to remember, to observe. I tried recording audio. Nothing. Only faint creaks, soft taps, and a subtle exhale when I was closest. I began to see it in reflections throughout the apartment. Puddles, windows, shiny surfaces. Always watching, always waiting, impossible to capture fully. I experimented with light. Shadows lengthened unnaturally near it, bending in ways no physics could explain, highlighting the detail of its carved veins and painted pupils. I noticed tiny scratches along the desk edges. Not mine, not from handling. Almost imperceptible, but deliberate, following a pattern I could not decipher. I attempted to leave the apartment entirely. The puppet remained behind, yet I could feel the tether, the patient observation extending beyond walls. I tried speaking aloud. You are not real. You cannot move. The air shifted, heavy, like a weight pressing downward, and a faint scent of pine filled the room. I left offerings, small coins, scraps of paper, folded into shapes. By morning, some were moved, some vanished entirely. The lines between perception and reality blurred. I could no longer trust my memory alone. The puppet was present when I wasn't looking, aware of me in every corner. I began timing its movements, logging them meticulously. Patterns emerged. A tilt of the head when I wrote, a flex of the fingers when I read. I realized the puppet was never dead wood. It existed in observation, in anticipation, in the silent corners of awareness. Even when I closed my eyes, I felt its gaze. Patient, precise, tethered to my attention, impossible to shake. The puppet was learning. Not life, not consciousness in the human sense, but the mechanics of attention, subtle interaction, and anticipation. I understood then the truth Collodi hinted at. The wood remembers, the puppet observes. And awareness, even without flesh, is a tether stronger than any string. I stopped touching it. I stopped moving it. Awareness alone became my only protection, my only control. Even now, it waits on my desk. Its painted eyes catch the lamplight just so. Shadows bend. My reflection in the mirror seems to linger longer than usual. The marionette has learned to breathe, not life, but awareness itself. And I remain tethered, cautious, and haunted, aware of a silent observer that will never relent.